favorite question is why. And it's not because I'm challenging what someone is saying, but rather so that I can learn and understand the reason why a decision is what it is. And it always helped me formulate in my mind a proper course of action, decision, or strategy. So I was one who asked a lot of questions early in my career. And in addition to that, I always tried to be a sponge and I tried to observe everything. There's so many points of inspiration in the fashion industry. Opportunities are all around us. And I asked questions. I was always curious. I had a point of view. And as I said, points of inspiration can come from anywhere, which is one of the reasons I enjoyed business for so many years that I did, because fashion's a trend business and it's really a reflection of technology, pop culture, and fashions. Yeah, that was really is basically that sounds my learning steps early in my career.
Well, I love your thoughts about asking why so that you can learn more. So important.
Yeah, and it's a question I honestly asked throughout my entire career, right? It wasn't just when I got started. It was a question that I would ask as I was continued to advance or from a development standpoint. Yeah, I think it's an important question.
So, as we think about personal branding, as you mentioned when we started, today's world is competitive. How vital is it for someone, especially in fashion industry, develop a personal brand?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Yolanda, I would tell you that it is critical whether you are in the fashion industry or not. I think obviously in the fashion industry, you deal with a lot of brands. So you naturally tend to think brands, think in the fashion industry. But I think it's just as important to build your personal brand, whether you are a buyer um, for a store, whether you're a designer, but even if you're an educator or an engineer or an accountant or a college student, right? And as you mentioned, in today's highly competitive world, I think it's a critical component to your success and is a necessity. And the truth is that most people start building their brands long before they realize that they're doing it. Just the act of creating a LinkedIn profile is the beginning of creating a brand. If you have a Facebook page, that is part of your brand. If you're on TikTok or any one of these other social media platforms. So many people already started, they just don't realize that they have begun creating their brand. And I like a quote from Tom Peters, who was a management and leadership visionary. And I actually think this came from the late 90s. And he says, we are CEOs of our own companies, me incorporated. To be in business today, your most important job is to be the head marketer for the brand called you. And so that came from Tom Peters. Like I said, I think it was in the late 90s. So this is the concept of personal branding is certainly not a new concept, right? It's one that's been around for some time. Everyone, regardless of where they are in their careers, owes it to themselves to self brand. It's the way you want people around you to perceive you. It's simply the way you present yourself in the world and the impact that you have. And after you leave, or what your legacy may be, so to speak. And I think it's exactly what it's exactly what Tom Brady or Michael Jordan or Oprah Winfrey, Jennifer Lopez, you can think of Kim Kardashian, and certainly Taylor Swift. They've all done it, right? They have it. They have really powerful brands. But for those of us that are non superstar athletes or talk show hosts or musicians or actors, it's more difficult than ever to stand out in today's marketplace. You mentioned that earlier. But at the same time, I think it's easier than ever to create your brand, whether it's through blogs or you can be an influencer, uh, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, doing podcasts like we're doing this evening. But I think along with it, it becomes harder to even manage your brands. Yeah. So as I said, I think personal brands are super important and allows you to differentiate yourself, and particularly in this competitive market. And because if you're not doing it, I can show you others are doing it for you and your brand. So you might as well take control of it versus letting somebody else.
That makes so much sense. So, take control of it yourself. As you mentioned, link as a key aspect of a personal brand, what are some other key components that define a solid personal brand?
Yeah, I think when you just think of a brand and you just start by thinking just the basics of the brands, if you think of any brand that's out there, it's really, it becomes what the perceptions in the mind of the consumer has, right? So it reflects the experiences that you've had with the brand. It reflects the reputation that it has, the brand has, like Starbucks, Coca-Cola, Apple, Nike, they all have it, right? They are powerful brands, but those are consumer brands. They're not people, which is what we're talking about this evening. And as unique as each one of those brands are, I always say that we need to have ourselves. We have our own unique brands as well. Just as those brands are key differentiators for themselves, so should your own personal brands. No different than how a company's vision starts with the brand. You should have a vision for your own personal brand as well. And I think many people don't consider themselves a brand, right? Because they think of in our industry, Ralph and Calvin Klein, and Tommy Hilfiger, and Vera Wang. However, you've you, you and myself and your listeners have all created a brand, whether we like it or not. We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. If you don't believe me, just Google your name and see what it says about you, right? If you have a Facebook page or a LinkedIn profile, it probably shows up on the very first page when you Google your name. Maybe you've been mentioned in a recent news article or a magazine or a publication. All these things are part of your personal brands. With the rise of the internet and the social media, we've all become public figures who can be looked up in a matter of touch of a button, thanks to Google. But you have to keep that in mind because potential employers and admission committees, your peers, they can easily find personal information online. So that's why managing your personal brand has become more important than ever. And it's scary, right? It's scary to think that data and that information's out there, but it's out there and you can't do anything about it. But what you can do is control your personal brand starting today moving forward by asking yourself, do you like what's out there? And what's the internet, what social media saying about you? And it's probably a good time if you haven't to maybe go through a social media audit to ensure that you're upholding your brand online. But at any rate, so I think there's just a couple things you have to ask yourselves as you're thinking through your brand in regarding brand is that what do you want to be known for? What differentiates you from everyone else who may have a similar background or set of experiences? What have you done to stand out? And as I mentioned earlier, what is your legacy? How do you want to be remembered? Those are questions you should be asking yourself every day. But as far as the key components, which I think was your question, there's a couple of things. I would just tell you there's a couple of things that I would say defines a solid personal brand. First, just knowing yourself, right? I think that's where it all starts. The key to any successful personal branding is authenticity, right? Consider who you are, what you like, and what do you want to be known for, right? And then second, just being consistent with your message and how you portray yourself, whether you're out speaking with individuals, whether it's on your social media. We all appreciate consistency. If you're on Twitter, or I guess it's X now, right? If you're on X or you blog or whatever it may be, you just want to make sure you're consistent. And then once you determine what your personal brand looks like, I think you have to start getting your name out there. Use the tools that you have at your disposal to communicate your knowledge, whether it's starting a blog, whether something on social media, write articles, just to position yourself as an authority. And then lastly, which is just engaging with your network, which cultivating genuine relationships with supporters in the industry you're working in or the sector you're into is super, super important because in order to build a brand, you have to have an audience, right? And many times your audience is your network that you connect with. So those are a few components that I would consider are certainly important as you define your personal brand.
And so, how have you defined or worked on building your own personal brand over the years?
I think building a brand takes time, right? Building a brand can change too, right? My brand is different today than it might have been when I was in the corporate world or what have you. But as I mentioned, I think the most important thing when developing a personal brand is just to be yourself, right? I think you need to get to know yourself. Like I said, keep in mind you can always adjust your brand and make changes in your life and your career goals. I certainly have. For instance, when I was working in the industry, I wanted to be someone that reflected someone who was results driven and strategic and built collaborative teams, was credible, trustworthy, with a passion for coaching, mentoring, and developing others. And to do that really required me building relationships,